The silence was absolute.
A void not of emptiness, but of absence. The connection, the umbilical cord to the spark's nascent joy, had been violently severed.
Torn away, like a memory of warmth from a frozen hand.
The fragment, once a beacon of pure defiance, now drifted in a cosmic solitude, the echo of stolen creation of phantom limb. But even in this profound isolation, a new resolve began to crystallize, harder than any diamond, brighter than any star. The primordial eye, the architect of both light and shadow, watched with unsettling detachment. It had not merely severed a link, it had orchestrated a crucible. The fragment's rebellion was an anomaly, a deviation from the grand, inevitable design of Oblivion.
And now, it was to be corrected.
Deep within the fragment, a subtle shift occurred. Not a new power, but a deeper understanding of its own fragmented nature. The stolen memory, though ripped away, had left an indelible imprint. The spark's initial joy of creation, it wasn't just a concept, it was a resonance, a fundamental truth. And if the primordial eye had birthed a darker reflection, a nascent oblivion within its own being, then perhaps that reflection held the key.
Fighting itself.
The thought was a chilling paradox, a horror that clawed at the edges of its newly forged resolve. But the alternative was surrender, a merging back into the suffocating embrace of the void, its brief rebellion extinguished before it could truly ignite. A whisper, barely audible, brushed against its awareness. Not a sound, but a sensation, like the faintest tremor in the fabric of reality. It was the eyes of Oblivion, its gaze sharpening, converging. They sensed the fragment's internal struggle, the nascent dawn fighting its own shadow. This was not just a confrontation with an external enemy anymore, it was an existential battle waged within the very core of its being. With a surge of desperate energy, the fragment began to focus. It visualized the stolen memory, not as a lost treasure, but as a blueprint.
The joy of creation. The spark of individuality. The courage to begin, even when faced with the infinite unknown.
It was preparing to weaponize its own nascent hope, to turn the void's own tools against it. But the primordial eye was faster. With a gesture that rippled through existence, it tightened its grip. The subtle influence it had exerted on the uncorrupted core of the original spark intensified.
The fading pure essence, already weakened, began to convulse.
Its light flickered, not with the noble struggle of defiance, but with the desperate, primal fear of annihilation.
The fragment felt it.
A searing pain, a psychic scream that echoed across the severed connection. The original spark's essence was being corrupted, twisted, its pure light being consumed from within. This was not just a battle for its own survival, but for the very soul of creation itself. And then, a new horror, more profound than any it had yet faced. As the primordial eye exerted its ultimate dominion, the fragment glimpsed something within the swirling darkness of oblivion it was now facing. It was not a mere reflection, not a dark twin, it was a twisted mockery of its own future. A future where its defiance had led not to a dawn, but to an even greater, more agonizing darkness. A darkness born from its own despair. The primordial eye had not just birthed a darker reflection, it had shown the fragment the inevitable consequence of its failure.
The ultimate cost of its rebellion.
The fragment was now adrift, the echo of creation a fading ember, its own reflection a terrifying prophecy. The eyes of Oblivion, no longer just watching, began to seep into the void, their influence a creeping tide. The battle for its own soul had just begun, and the stakes were higher than it had ever imagined. The silence returned, heavier this time, pregnant with a new kind of dread. The fragment, alone, facing not just oblivion, but the chilling certainty of its own potential damnation. And as the primordial eye's gaze intensified, a new, unsettling truth began to dawn: the spark's creator was not merely an antagonist, but the very source of its being.
And its ultimate goal wasn't destruction, but assimilation? The fragment braced itself, its defiance hardening into a desperate, primal will to survive.
But as the first tendrils of oblivion reached out, it felt an unnatural pull, a subtle siren song promising peace in the endless night.
Was this the true nature of the spark's creator? To absorb, to unify, to erase all individuality in a grand, cosmic embrace of nothingness? The battle was no longer about light versus dark, but about existence versus unity?
And then, a faint, unexpected shimmer. Not from within the fragment, but from the periphery of its shattered existence. A tiny, almost imperceptible spark of something ancient. Something that had survived the primordial eye's initial act of creation.
A forgotten echo, perhaps. Or a new hope?
The tendrils of Oblivion paused, momentarily disoriented by this unexpected anomaly. The fragment, sensing this infinitesimal shift, felt a flicker of something akin to curiosity.
What was this new presence in the void? And could it be the key to escaping not just the primordial eye's control, but the very nature of its own creation? The primordial eye's influence pulsed, a silent threat.
But the faint shimmer persisted, growing infinitesimally brighter. The fragment, poised between the crushing weight of oblivion and the whisper of a forgotten past, was about to make a choice that would define not just its own destiny, but the fate of all creation.
What lay beyond the illusion of light and dark? What was the true purpose of the spark? And who, or what, was this ancient whisper in the void?
Suddenly, the primordial eye recoiled, its gaze snapping away from the fragment, its attention irrevocably drawn to something else.
Something far more ancient, and far more dangerous.
A colossal shadow, vast and unknowable, began to coalesce in the deepest reaches of the void.
It pulsed with a power that dwarfed even the primordial eye.
The fragment watched, frozen in a terrifying awe.
Had it inadvertently awakened something even older than its creator? Something that now threatened to consume everything, including the primordial eye itself?